sticks. Sharp ones, of the dangerous variety. In this video, I'm gonna be centering bold text on the screen for my whole intro. There's just one small problem. Everyone watches this channel for background noise. Yeah, I'm just gonna rank the spears and pikes together in one nice big swoop. Not that I value my time little enough to make a follow-up list with only 5 entries on it, yet it is precisely because I value my time little enough to give myself all the busy work I possibly can, because 16 paragraphs is apparently a lacking foundation by my standards. You know the drill by now. If you're new, please prepare for my exorbitant volume of fanfare and word confetti to shove at least one of these in a spot where it absolutely doesn't belong, and I look forward to everyone agreeing with me for at least the next 2 minutes, because there's no way in unholy Catholic hell that'll be the case with the following entry. Number 21, the Soldering Iron. Nope, that's not it. The Soldering Iron. Guys, I don't know what you think a soldering iron looks like, but it ain't this. The Soldering Iron here is busted, but like in the complete opposite direction of how it's commonly used and interpreted. And when people refer to this weapon as unironically cracked, they're actually bringing to attention its many fatal flaws and blemishes down to the roots of its very foundation, rippling outward and reverberating through the framework of space-time to create a cosmically depressing fountain of dog shit. Can't be buffed, can't be infused, has a 2% chance to be wrenched from the dead, clammy hands of what could be some cruel god's metaphysical representation of testicular torsion with a funny hat, and I hope that near 200 fire damage on a +10 doesn't get your motors turning too rapidly, because getting it to actually scale off anything is not an aspiration worth hollowing yourself over. Saying hits from the weapon can temporarily block healing via Estus is a misdirect on its best day, since all it really does is decrease its healing efficiency by around 20%. A critical distinction that wouldn't even be that important if there wasn't already an item in the same game that shares its description wording but procs a completely different effect. Yet this game is so old that capably allowing multiple supermarkets of distance away from anything considered valuable or worthwhile is a challenge I'm sure at least 2 of you are sniffing around for. So if that's you, and using the broken sword at the beginning isn't as funny anymore, load up a cheat table and spawn this bitch into your hands for the quintessential Sisyphus experience. Number 20, the Rotten Ghru Spear. Very, very easy to oversell this one, I've learned. Okay, so wasting 0 time here, I'm just gonna dive straight into the poison infusion, since the game doesn't waste any time telling you it's the only infusion this spear has that's worth its own build. So, with 40 luck, a +10 poison infused Rotten Ghru Spear is capable of just over 90 poison per R1, which is very good at sounding like it's nuts. Now here's why it isn't. Since the spear's R1 chain has a slower set of animations than, let's say, a curved sword or a dagger, status buildup per R1 isn't usually gonna be the very first thing I'm looking at on a spear. It's not the slowest moveset, but you got better options. And the reason I chose these 2 weapon types as a comparison is because the Rotten Ghru curved sword and dagger both receive the same base buildup on a poison infusion as the spear, while being equipped with a much faster R1 chain to boot. You do sacrifice a bit of range, obviously, but R1s from these 3 weapon types are all capable of staggering the same sized enemies, so if you can get 1 off, you can definitely also get 2 with the spear and a curved sword, and you can almost always get 3 with a dagger. Now this is around the time I predict players in favor of the spear would bring attention to the spear's weapon art that's capable of connecting multiple times in quick succession while also having decent hyper armor, but as is the case with a lot of the game's multi-hit skills and attacks, those status values per hit are never really as high as you want them to be. And when I ran it down the mountain pass with a +10 to poison infused copy of each, a fully extended charge on the spear was never able to proc status, where a normal 3-tap with the dagger and curved sword that doesn't cost 22 FP consistently returned to proc. Number 19, the Golden Ritual Spear. Because you're always building in the direction of something. The Golden Ritual Spear is for those rare playthroughs where you want to try something new and different, but your low impulse control when seeing a cool miracle has clusterfuck to build through the kitchen wall and down the back of the pantry, and respecking is pussy shit for those okay with admitting defeat. 18 intelligence is by no means a substantial investment or anything. It'll get you well past the benchmark of most basic sorceries, which just so happen to be the best ones, usually, and I can't pretend having an intelligence requirement without intelligence scaling even gets me that annoyed, because that's also not the problem. Sorceries by themselves still have their own intelligence benchmark that must be met before they're even castable anyways. So as far as 18 intelligence goes, you either already have it or you've already made up your mind about casting sorceries. My problem with the Golden Ritual Spear is that it leaves way too much upfront damage on the table as a compromise for being a weapon catalyst hybrid. Split damage is just as unkind to builds as they are in other entries in the FromSoft lineup, and with a few notable exceptions, you're usually just better off settling with the stick that gives you the highest number. High physical AR is usually optimal, but even 80 or 90% magic damage is still way better than 50% into each. Yet starting off with a near clean 50-50 split while having your best scaling in Faith that only influences the magic damage of the weapon means this spear gets to spend almost all of its time as an option being the victim of a very unforgiving defense system that punishes this exact means of dealing damage. It either fails to stand out as a weapon on any build that isn't dedicated entirely to Faith, or it fails to stand out as a sorcery catalyst on dedicated Faith builds because the Archdeacon staff exists. Number 18, the Tailbone Spear. At its absolute core of cores, a bird shit weapon with bird shit scaling that undeservedly landed on a 5-star knockout of a weapon art that's just barely good and fun enough to farm for. And seeing how you'll be doing most of your farming in Anor Laukatraz, I hope it sufficiently comes across just how good and just how fun this L2 can be in both capable and dipshit hands. If you're not firing it through walls and around corners with a marginal percentage of your brain power, you can still accidentally land on a cackle or two by blasting a bitch off one of the game's many conveniently placed cliff sides. Its upfront damage is far from great, so far from it that ignoring infusions on other weapons entirely still can't even give it enough headway to possibly make something of itself. This spear gets out of bed for one painfully isolated reason, and even hiding around a corner and sending an EF2 up all of his ass begins to hit a diminishing return of enjoyment when I'm doing it on my 15th playthrough. Number 17, the Saint Bident. I mean, fuck's sake, man. Just give me the bullet ID, I'll do it myself. Bro, why do I gotta tinker around with shit? Like, this ruins every game I play. Okay, change this here. What's the bullet ID for that shit that one enemy uses? The one, you know the one I'm talking about. Like, the slug that fires the weird-ass, like, holy arrow. I can't find it. Damn, y'all getting a whole ass tutorial today. Okay, so I couldn't find the bullet ID for the holy arrow, but yeah, that's all it would have needed. That's all I'm saying. Chaos and Dark are both acceptable avenues for infusions, but the lightning infusion is probably the best it's got, and even that won't have you ringing up old friends about this new lore you found or anything. An A scaling in Faith looks impressive if Elden Ring is your only FromSoft game, and the final AR looks very nice when compounded on a damage table, but even against lightning weak enemies like dragons and armorclad, the lion's share of the damage is still being handed out by the physical half of the split. Winged Spear and Four-Pronged Plow both take advantage of a greater number when it comes to lightning damage on a good Faith build, and even with its many infusion options, it still always feels like I'm settling for less damage in lieu of a fashion statement. And if that's you, then you know what? Go ahead. I think that's been all of us at least a couple times at some point, so. Number 16, the Pike. I do not hate pikes in this game. I also do not like pikes in this game. Pikes as a weapon subclass are a breed of weapon I carry a bit of a middle-of-the-road sentiment for. Although a drastic improvement in the range department, the slower moveset does make them unwieldy on status infusions while also vice clamping their DPS. Something I've always found a bit unnecessary since the AR per hit on pikes already don't do much to stand out versus spears. Well, I mean, for the most part. The running light attack comprises multiple hits that's very good at pretending it's an L2. It's actually quite different. Instead of reliably flinching same-sized enemies with its precursor hits to hold them in place and allow for consistent damage, you are given the opportunity to test your reading comprehension on a random item description after a basic bitch knight watches you shoot yourself into a fence and then counter-punches a hole through your head. So the pliability of my disinterested sentiment will almost completely hinge around the weapon's unique skill, which is why we've got a full graveyard slot ahead of us before we even touch the DLC pikes. As for the free trial version, the infusions are about as spicy as any standard spear. Like, they're not bad, they're actually pretty good by themselves, but I'm never doing more damage than I would be with the same infusion on a Partizan or a Winged Spear. And trading all of that bite for the ability to whack dipshits from the next neighborhood over is, 1, not the benefit it sounds like, and 2, more comfortably practiced on the Greatlance anyways. Number 15, the spear. The spear. It is the spear. It's spearier than any other spear, and getting outdone by a slot in a merchant's inventory space for 1,500 souls is in fact the speariest thing I can possibly think of. Whatever infusion you throw at the basic starting spear, the Winged Spear can make look just a bit snazzier, and with extra range. Shield Splitter isn't as unassuming as players think, and even though I prefer a nice solid charge in some situations, bouncing around guarding enemies can be a bit annoying in the early game if you don't know what a parry or a buckler shield is. In a neck-and-neck race against a follower Javelin to see who can biff its basic pokes the most, the shield splitter weapon art might actually end up doing the spear a huge favor just by virtue of its seldom appearance. The skill itself has a good range on a weapon that could definitely use a bit more of it, considering you're using a spear. And if you like shield splitter as a skill, the starting spear is one of the only times in the whole game you'll ever get to see it. Whether that means the weapon is an easier sell than the Partizan or the winged spear isn't really a decision I can make for you, but it's not, and you shouldn't. Number 14, Yorshka's Spear. Yorshka's Spear. Oh, I'm gonna fucking become a casualty. The Spear of Yorshka. That's what I'm calling it. Unfortunately, since this is a PvE list on a long since converted PvE channel, draining any amount of FP per strike is not gonna be a utility I'm frothing at the mouth over, even if only for the silencing of scripted NPC invaders, seeing how applying a liberal amount of spasm to your L2 with any weapon equipped seems to get the job done just as fast. And looking past that benefit puts us even further down the shit chute, because all that's left behind the gimmick is an unbuffable, uninfusable, triple C scaling spear that needs a gluttonous investment into all of them just to bring its damage past most of its competition. Only during New Game Plus iterations, where your pockets are brimming with more souls than your whole family would know what to do with, is where Yorshka's Spear finally gets acclimated to its given conditions. But if you're hanging it up after one full all bosses run, investing into strength and dex equally until soft cap seems to be the way to go. If the Strike and Pierce package deal feels that attractive to you, then I would gladly recommend it on New Game Plus journeys, and perhaps even parts in the DLC where it's able to outdamage most of its options. But on a weapon that needs such a selfish investment, that's really its only opportunity for spotlight. Number 13, Arstor's Spear. Yeah, no. Fuck no. No, I'm not giving up the Hollow Slayer for a spear that had all its style points thrown out because Earl McPisspants started using it to skewer shrimp at a weekend cookouts or something. I would just consider the additional poison buildup a little extra spice thrown onto a dish that somehow didn't need it and needs way more of it at the same time, because building into luck only marginally increases its stat buildup per strike, and even on 80 luck, it refuses to look at even breaching 50 buildup. The Rotten Ghru spear pulls twice the weight and then some when properly infused, even if you're sacrificing damage to make it happen, and it certainly does a lot more to earn itself some favor with an early to mid-game dex build, but even then you'd have to choke back a pretty hefty dose of buyer's remorse to make it all the way to the end, pretending 30 HP per kill makes up for the fact that you chose this weapon over a fucking great sword in Dark Souls 3, you lunatic. Number 12, the Follower Javelin. Was honestly expecting a weapon like this to be locked behind a farming wall. They had every excuse to do it, so I'm actually kinda surprised by it being a guaranteed pickup. A spear that can be outranged by half the game's thrusting swords is made all the more satisfying when you get to peg things with a surprise projectile attack. And despite the similitude it shares with the Smith script lineup in its later game, a lesson was still obviously learned here, because giving that projectile a 15 FP cost means I still get to bitch about its bad range. On a heavy infusion, the Follower Javelin might be the single best spear to build into. That selfish, unsplit physical damage is a clincher at 60 strength. A remarkable asset if it wasn't given the range of a pencil and didn't blunder basic R1s like a fist weapon. I don't feel like I'm properly using this spear as intended without the Farron or Ashen Estus ring or something, but on a pure strength build, that shit can ground Midir into a fine garden mulch. Number 11, the Gargoyle Flame Spear. That weapon art is some motherfucking salt, and not even I'm hollow enough to pretend it makes up for the stat scalings it presents. Don't get me wrong, I do think the spear itself is a bit underconsidered, but weapons like this are why not falling in love with your total AR is a commandment that needs to be triple underlined, printed, and then stapled to your forehead. If you're not looking at infusions, the Gargoyle Flame Spear is the highest damaging spear out of both the spears and the pikes. However, its physical damage falls close to last when compared even to other uninfused spears, and its fire damage falls close to last when compared to other spears with a chaos infusion. It is clear as day that this weapon was manufactured to be a victim to the penalty of split damage because they just thought the weapon art had that hard of a punch. Like, it's fun. It's most certainly fun to use, and it does give out a heftier block of damage than a normal charge on a normal spear, but building around Int and Faith lends a much bigger opportunity to the 6 Chaos Infusion spears I've already made prior, and it's just as likely to sign you up for some easily preventable counter hit damage while midair against an enemy that's mentally conscious enough to recognize a man with a spear is currently attacking them. And if the recipient of this somehow gets stun locked by the precursor hits, then I'll just go ahead and take a guess and say you probably didn't need the weapon art to even kill it. Like, bro, if you want a good Pyromancer's armament, make a Chaos Partizan. Spin Sweep looks just as sexy and you won't kill yourself trying to use it. Number 10, the Drang Twinspears. To go with your dang shoes on your dang feet, son. It starts by going down the cheat sheet of what's found on a good spear, spits on it, wipes its ass with it, and then presents me with a brand new list that's just one big ass checkbox with a line beside it that reads Power Stancing. The Drang Spears has a misleading damage number that appears lower than almost every other option, even on infusions. And that's because the bitch that drops them to you actually drops 2. Obviously doesn't do any favors for equip load when you're lugging around 2 spears instead of 1, but the Saint B-Day is still a half unit heavier, so it's not like that's a problem you're completely inexperienced with. Pontiff's Right Eye and Karthus Beacon can both be fully activated with only 3 L1 attacks instead of the 5 or 6 hits it usually takes for a normal spear. Flat bonuses from weapon buffs now do twice the work just on account of your attack frequency, and status gets applied twice as fast as well. The initial swipe of the left-hand spear on the first L1 is prone to deflecting off surfaces and kind of ruining your momentum, but I've seen enough comment sections and forums over the years to know that "watch your spacing, moron" could be a line from Anor Londo's national anthem, so that doesn't bother me, and it honestly shouldn't bother you either, because the pair of damage cannons you've just strapped to your hands here are way too good at their jobs for you to start feeling gun-shy when fighting on anything that isn't a perfectly flat floor. Number 9, the Lothric Knight Long Spear. Funny little poking stick, this thing is. Okay, so funny thing about the Pike moveset, a lot of the Pikes in the game actually get their own unique moveset, but the standard moveset works a little differently. If you're using a Pike that doesn't have the original moveset, an uncharged R2 attack actually prevents your character from turning long before the attack itself even has an opportunity to land, resulting in baby shit tracking that makes it generally uncomfortable to use properly in any environment that isn't a narrow hallway. I think an NPC could backstab you by complete accident if you pulled out an uncharged R2 with a Pike. I've never seen it happen, but that's how shitty it is. Now, the standard Pike and the long spear both get a moveset that disables your turning a bit too late, and what this does is it allows the weapon's hitbox to be active slightly before you're disallowed from making a pivot. Not only does this give it insane tracking against agile enemies, but you can even turn it into a short little sweep attack that can hit multiple dudes despite it being a poking motion, all while still counting as pierce damage. If I'm being honest, the absurdly efficient tracking on its uncharged R2s is kinda like, that's more of a PvP thing, and even if it wasn't, using an uncharged R2 on a weapon class made for running fuckers down starts to feel like a smaller advantage the more I look at it, leaving the only real advantage it can flaunt over the others is the poise bonus you get when it's equipped, which, yeah, I mean, that's worth something. Number 8, the Dragonslayer Spear. Lightning has always sort of been king of the elements. Like, I think that's an unspoken agreement that most of us have, but not because weapons that hand it out just get innately better scaling or anything. And everyone in the game suddenly turning into massive pussies during a thunderstorm is, I think, what saves the Dragonslayer Spear from feeling like such a stat pig, even on late game builds. Dexterity is obviously the first priority here, but building directions after that start to become unclear. And if you're running this on a New Game Plus iteration, then you've probably found yourself heading in this awkward direction of Faith second, then, I don't know, maybe a bit of strength after that, and, well, the weapon art is pretty expensive, so a bit more attunement might not hurt, and then you realize the sound of an egg frying has nothing to do with your GPU and is in fact coming from inside your own skull. Since no one in Anor Londo has properly brushed up on electrical safety training for a good few centuries, the weapon art dealing mostly lightning damage means an L2 into R2 combo can rip out an impressive chunk of health from pretty much anything. Even if you have another spear with a lightning infusion you might be more built around. If the weapon art feels too expensive, be less selfish, bitch, or just use Ashen Ring or Farron Ring or something else to mitigate it. You find the spear way too late to pretend building into attunement instead of weapon damage is a good decision. And if you're a Faith build looking for chunky R1s, literally any spear with a lightning infusion on it is gonna pull more weight, so just use that. Number 7, the Greatlance. God damn, Pikes really know how to show up to work when the going gets tough. And the Greatlance was around the time where my general opinion on Pikes started to turn around a bit, but even now I still think that has more to do with the DLC Pikes both landing on some real blue ribbon 5-star ass clincher atom bomb weapon arts. But that's not to say the Greatlance deserves to be accepted from its due acclaim. The Greatlance gives you a shitload of range and a charged heavy that on paper could be confused for an L2 charge, except it needs 0 FP, does way more damage, especially when revved up at point blank, and cannot be parried. I don't choose the Greatlance because it's a Greatlance. I choose the R2 that happens to come with it. Being the longest pike and longest weapon in the entire game is honestly just extra spice. And with the damage it's capable of laying down on a heavy infusion, everything else about it that might drag it down just stops mattering to me. Literally everything else about the weapon, however, is it's kind of shit. It's honestly, it's like it needs a very specific build to work, and even then you're still using a very specific attack with it. Honestly, as much as I love this weapon, I feel like I need to just admit that before my biases get ahead of me. Number 6, the Ringed Knight Spear. For a lot of the remaining weapons here, it's gonna start feeling a lot like I'm ranking the weapon art exclusively tied to the weapon and not the weapon as a whole package, and that's because I am, and because it's the most notable and only discrepancy between them and a long sharp stick you picked up in the woods and started calling a pike. The Ringed Knight Spear has an embered mode that counts as both an attack and a subsequent buff that lingers for 15 seconds, applying to all its attacks an extra 90 fire damage and an extra hit of serotonin that could rival actual therapy. Under ideal conditions and a player who knows shit about fuck, this allows it to reliably compete with even Greatlance in terms of upfront damage, but only when embered. Unembered damage pushes Dookie down the back windshield and should always be ignored. Unembered damage can throw a tantrum in the backseat all at once because that's where it's staying. When using this pike, your entire combat loop is pared down to one big fat L2 button followed by a series of variably timed R2s over the next 15 seconds, depending on whether you want the full combo of the art or you're just trying to kill some weeds with the embered sweeping heavy. Rinse, repeat, ridiculous. That initial L2 makes for the perfect combat opener anyway, since that's the attack that travels the most distance and is the easiest to space out, making for a really engaging combat loop with a weapon that can hit hard when it wants, and it makes for the perfect challenge run to beat the game while only using weapon arts, because as soon as that glow leaves the blade, you might as well be slapping bitches with a foam padded tire iron. Number 5, the Partizan. There's the cream of the crop, and then there's the crop duster.
I call this one the slice and dice.
The Partizan might not be a step up from the Wing Spear or the Plow for that matter in damage, but what it lacks in damage, I mean, even the damage isn't bad at all. I don't know why I was framing it like it is or something, but if it did lack damage, it doesn't. But if it did, then it would make up for it through pure 100% horizontal supremacy. It's got spin sweep on it. It's got spin sweep is what I'm saying, and I really like spin sweep in this game. Normally spears are kinda ass when it comes to any form of reliable crowd control, and the only other spears with this particular moveset either blow generational penis or they're at the sphincter end of the DLC and need the weapon art to keep it alive anyway. So if I'm interested in any spear with this exact moveset, it's probably gonna have to be this one because at least I can infuse it, and at least its asking price as far as stat investment goes doesn't make me recoil out of my $15,000 gold encrusted gamer chair. Number 4, the Winged Spear. The spear of the common man, so as to say, any build can make it sing. It's already hard to argue against when seeing the work it does on physical infusions, but what I think is a bit more important is how it handles elemental infusions. If we actually look at how the damage is tallied up, the elemental half of the split always seems to find a breadcrumb or two more than competing options, allowing it to not only contest for the potential highest total AR of all elementally infused spears, but also gives it a damage split that won't get as bottlenecked by flat defenses. Yes, the infusion scalings absolutely should excite you, but the lower base damage makes it to where sloppy infusion work on your end still leaves just a bit of room to have the whole thing go tits up if you don't know what you're doing. Heavy infusion still favors the Javelin and the Partizan. Lightning, Dark, and Chaos infusions all apply more juice to the Plow and the President Bident, and the Plow also just barely beats it out on Simple and Crystal as well. Even with all these infusions, it can still dole out some impressive numbers, don't get me wrong, but heading straight for the Sharp infusion is really your only ace in the hole if you actually want the best it has to offer. Number 3, the Lothric War Banner. The War Banner's unique skill increases all damage by 15%. I think people confuse it with Commander's Standard a lot due to the animation, but this is technically a weapon buff and not an aura buff. This is very different. If the weapon stops being in either of your hands at any point, the buff is gonna leave right along with it. The additional fire damage on the Ringed Knight Spear feels wonderful to use in the right places, and the Greatlance allowing access to a free charged weapon art tied to the R2 button is down the middle cracked like your uncle's ass, but it's hard not to look at 15% more testosterone salted on top of my main dish and not give that the utmost respect. And I say main weapon because, dipshit, even I'm not mentally crammed enough to try and save the pee-pants damage on the War Banner itself. And being the lightest pike in the game by a good few units means that it fucking agrees with me. Sacred Oath and Power Within are both compatible with it since it acts as a weapon buff, and even miracle casters that dip into some tomfoolery with the Awakening buff have plenty of room to join in. Don't bother infusing it. Fuck, don't even put it in your right hand. What are you gonna do, kill something with it? Put it behind your back, whip out lightning arrow, and get to zapping. Number 2, the Four-Pronged Plow. I think the plow might be one of the hardest weapons in this game to make shitty. The juice this thing's infusions can tap into renders it nearly immune to user error. Like, it just fucking works. The urge to make a farming tool one of the most torqued weapons in the game I can feel being pressed against my neck all the way from overseas. Like, they were absolutely having a laugh in the office when they were making the damage numbers for this. The enemies that drop it are a dime a dozen in the early game, so you might even have one of these just chilling in your storage box somewhere on an old save. Now, if we're taking the dipshit route of ignoring infusibility, the AR doesn't seem too great on the surface, and on most physical infusions, the Winged Spear, Partizan, and even the Javelin can all climb over this one pretty handily. And if this is where your opinion on this weapon ends, then it's time to surrender to your mental illness and witness the murder magic of a lightning plow. Comparing all the spears on different elemental infusions usually ends up with this weapon being a touch higher up the ladder than it probably deserves, and even though the Winged Spear does receive a higher focus on the elemental half of its damage split, the plow will usually end up having more total AR. And yes, the flat defense system is important when it comes to like split damage and everything, but how much that matters is a direct negative correlation to how far you are into the game. The skill does get a lot of shit for how your character trips over their own feet, but the plow actually receives a surprise clincher tied to its L2. Basically, the charge on the plow borrows most of its attack values from a pike instead of a spear, giving it way more damage, knockback, and even more potential status build-up to enemies. And I really like to think that's because someone who worked on this game predicted fashion statements would one day outrank effectiveness by importance, and played the perfect trap card by hiding torqued infusions and extra damage behind a painfully relatable absence of physical coordination. It's a farming tool that's worth the farm. Just don't burn down the village's wheat garden with your new Chaos Rake. Number 1, the Dragonslayer Swordspear. The game says it's a spear, so it's a fucking spear, bitch. And it's also a halberd. And yes, it is a spear moveset, not a pike moveset, meaning it attacks with the speed of a spear. And now you understand why that weapon buff is so important. Falling Bolt, I think, is the single hardest hitting pure lightning weapon art you ever obtain access to, even counting the Dragonslayer Great Axe, because half of that damage is still physical. Granted, the Great Axe's weapon art deals way more damage than any weapon that even appears on this list, but this isn't an all weapons video or anything. And now I'm fucked. The weapon art is similar to the Ringed Knight Spear in that it's both a special attack and a weapon buff post-use, but unlike the latter of the two, doesn't get handed the drawback of shitty damage without the weapon buff. In fact, at 40 dex, even when measured up against other sharp infused spears, the physical damage alone is still enough to start threatening the Winged Spear's crown, not even including the supplemental lightning bonus, which is tiny enough by comparison to send a pretty clear message that you're not really supposed to treat this as a faith weapon. In fact, I think the weapon art makes it one of the more flexible weapons in the game to build around, since high faith builds get more damage from the lightning bolt if you want fighting Midir to be done with a 2-digit amount of brain cells, but the subsequent buff applies an extra 80 lightning damage that doesn't scale with anything, feeding into high dex builds that might be more interested in just poking shit. From there, you can take the build in the quality direction to squeeze even more out of the R1s, or plug some levels into faith to get both benefits of the weapon art in tandem. Take that advantage and roll it into a free halberd moveset when two-handed, and you're ready to handle almost any amount of pushback the DLCs can even give you. You'll practically forget why Midir made you so mad the first few times you fought him. Hell, there might be a risk of your brain replacing the memory of the boss with a PNG of a fucking speed bag.